When a fisherman pulled Carol Wayne's body from Mexican waters in 1985, investigators knew something wasn't right. The Tonight Show star had vanished 3 days earlier after a heated argument, and the man she was with had already flown home. But the autopsy results would raise even more questions than answers. Carol Wayne was everywhere in the 1970s. If you watched late-night TV, you knew her face, her laugh, that unmistakable presence on The Tonight Show. Over 100 appearances as Johnny Carson's comedic partner made her a household name. America saw the bubbly blonde who could deliver a punchline with perfect timing. They saw the glamour, the confidence, the star power. But behind the glamorous image was a woman fighting battles most of viewers never saw. And her final days in Mexico would expose just how dark things had become. The truth is, Carol's life was a series of compromises from the very beginning. While other teenagers were going to prom and hanging out with friends, she was living out of suitcases, performing night after night in freezing arenas. The Icecapade schedule was brutal. There was no room for a normal childhood, no space for the kind of experiences that helped shape a person's identity outside of their career. When that ice skating accident happened, it didn't just end her career on the ice. It forced her to confront a terrifying reality. She had no backup plan, no high school diploma, no skills outside of entertainment. At an age when most people are just figuring out what they want to do with their lives, Carol had already lost everything once. It all started in Chicago, 1942. Carol was 15 when she and her sister joined the Icecapades, touring 42 cities across the country. The dream came with a cost, though. Both girls dropped out of high school to chase the spotlight. Then one performance changed everything. Carol fell during a routine, and the injury left a 5-inch scar running down her knee. The fall ended her skating career before it really began. She'd sacrificed her teenage years, her education, all for ice skating. And now that was gone too. But Carol wasn't the type to quit. She and her sister headed to Las Vegas, landing jobs as showgirls at the Tropicana. The outfits were revealing, the lifestyle was fast, and opportunities started coming their way. During trips to LA, Carol caught the attention of Hollywood scouts. One screen test later, she had her first role. She'd joke about it later, glancing down at her figure and saying she knew exactly why she kept getting cast. The roles kept coming. Guest spots on The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and I Dream of Jeannie, always playing the bombshell with the sultry name. Then 1967 hit, and everything changed. Johnny Carson's team brought her on to The Tonight Show for a recurring sketch. She played the matinee lady opposite Carson's Art Fern character, the innocent beauty who accidentally dropped double entendres left and right. The chemistry was undeniable. Rumors swirled about what might be happening backstage between them. When asked about it years later, Carol didn't exactly deny anything. She admitted there were feelings, but the timing was always off. They were never single at the same time. She even said Carson still saw her every day in his dreams. Bold words. Carson himself never publicly confirmed any of it. The Tonight Show gig was more than just a job for Carol. It was stability in an industry that offered very little of it. For nearly a decade, she had consistent work, regular paychecks, and national visibility. The matinee lady became her identity. Audiences loved her. She'd found her niche, and for a while, it seemed like maybe she'd finally caught a break. But that security was an illusion. In Hollywood, nothing lasts forever, especially when your entire career depends on one show, one producer, one character. While her career was taking off, her personal life was falling apart. Her first marriage to Larry Sir barely lasted 2 years. Then came photographer Barry Feinstein, who had connections to Bob Dylan and Steve McQueen. They married in 1969, and Carol had her only child, a son named Alex. But that marriage crumbled too, ending in 1974. A year later, she married TV producer Burt Sugarman. 3 marriages, 3 divorces. Carol once joked that ice skating taught her to be limber, but marriage taught her to be flexible. By the early 1980s, cracks were showing. Johnny Carson threatened to walk away from The Tonight Show, and NBC panicked. They convinced him to stay, but the show was cut from 90 minutes to just 1 hour. Material had to go, and Carol's matinee lady sketches were among the casualties. Almost overnight, her most stable gig vanished. Then her marriage to Sugarman ended. Jobs that had been plentiful for a decade suddenly dried up completely. Nobody was calling anymore. The rejection was brutal. Carol was in her early 40s, an age when Hollywood already considers women past their prime. The industry that had embraced her as a young showgirl now had no use for her. Casting directors who once jumped at the chance to book her weren't returning calls. She'd been typecast so thoroughly as the ditzy blonde that breaking into serious, dramatic roles seemed impossible. And without the Tonight Show platform, she'd lost her visibility. Out of sight, out of mind. That's how Hollywood works. Carol was desperate. In 1984, she posed for Playboy, hoping the exposure would revive her career and bring in some cash. It didn't work. That same year, she filed for bankruptcy, listing her income as zero. Behind the scenes, things were even worse. Her son had introduced her to clove cigarettes in high school, and she would become obsessed with them. The smell got her kicked out of restaurants. Then she moved on to harder substances. The money she did have was disappearing fast, funding habits that were spiraling out of control. There was one bright spot. Carol landed a dramatic role in the film Heartbreakers, a complete departure from her comedic work. When it screened at the Berlin Film Festival, critic Roger Ebert singled out her performance, calling it heartbreaking and saying it pulled the entire movie together. Finally, recognition as a serious actress. It could have been the start of a whole new chapter, but it turned out to be her last film. January 1985. Carol decided to go to Mexico, to a resort in Manzanillo. The official story was that she wanted to get clean to escape her destructive habits. She brought along Edward Durston, a car salesman who floated around Hollywood circles. Their relationship status was unclear, but whatever they were to each other, Durston didn't seem like the best influence. Hotel staff later reported seeing them drinking and partying throughout their stay. If Carol had come to Mexico to recover, it wasn't working. On January 10th, everything fell apart. Carol and Durston were supposed to fly back to Los Angeles, but they missed their flight. The resort they'd been staying at was expensive, and they couldn't afford to go back. Staff tried to help, securing them a room at a cheaper hotel nearby, the Playa de Santiago. Carol was furious. She considered the place a dump and refused to get out of the taxi when they arrived around 8:30 that evening. While Durston and the bellboy brought their luggage inside, Carol stood outside fuming. When Durston came back down, she was gone. He waited at the hotel bar, expecting her to show up eventually. She never did. Here's where Durston's behavior gets strange. Instead of searching for her or alerting anyone, he checked into a different hotel entirely. Then he flew back to Los Angeles the next day, taking her bags with him. He told the airline she'd pick them up in the morning, even though he hadn't seen her in hours and had no idea where she was. 3 days later, on January 13th, a fisherman casting his net made a grim discovery. Carol's fully clothed body was floating in a shallow bay. She'd been dead for 36 to 48 hours, meaning whatever happened occurred shortly after that argument at the hotel. The autopsy revealed something unexpected. No alcohol, no drugs. Whatever her struggles had been, she'd been clean in those final moments. There were no cuts, no bruises, nothing to suggest she'd fallen or had been attacked. The water was shallow and calm. How does someone drown in conditions like that? Mexican authorities immediately suspected foul play. Durston looked guilty from every angle. They fought right before she disappeared. He hadn't filed a missing persons report. He'd left the country with her belongings. And when investigators dug into his past, they found something chilling. In 1969, another actress, Diane Linkletter, had called Durston to her house. Shortly after he arrived, she jumped out of a window. Police had cleared him back then, focusing on substances in her system. But two women connected to the same man, both meeting tragic ends? It seemed like too much of a coincidence. The investigation hit wall after wall. Mexican authorities wanted answers, but they were working with limited resources and conflicting witness statements. Durston had already returned to the United States, making him difficult to question thoroughly. The hotel staff could confirm the argument and Carol's disappearance, but no one had actually seen what happened after she walked away from that taxi. The timeline was murky, the physical evidence was minimal. Without witnesses, without clear signs of violence, building a case against anyone was nearly impossible. The longer the investigation dragged on, the colder the trail became. Despite all this suspicion, despite multiple investigations, Durston was never charged. Carol's death was ruled an accident. The official conclusion? She'd been upset, walking along the beach in the dark, distracted, and somehow slipped into the water. It's a theory that leaves more questions than answers. No injuries, no substances impairing her, shallow, gentle water, and a man with a disturbing history who left her stranded in a foreign country. There's a painful irony to how Carol died. One of the running jokes on The Tonight Show was that with her figure, she'd never drown. Johnny Carson once told her on air, "Someday you'll be 47, his age at the time. She replied, "I hope so." She was only 42 when they found her body. After her death, Carson took the Art Fern character off the air for nearly a year, a quiet tribute to the woman who had helped make those sketches so memorable. Carol Wayne spent her life entertaining people, always chasing the next role, the next chance. But Hollywood took more than it gave. 3 failed marriages, a career that vanished overnight, financial ruin, substance struggles, and finally, a lonely death in a foreign country with more questions than answers. Whatever really happened in Mexico that night, the truth went to the grave with her.